Welcome back. In the last lesson, we had an introduction to honorific speech. Let's start talking about a few more unique honorific verbs that we'll also need to know. Here are some of the most common ones. 먹다 or 마시다. So to eat or to drink, these will become 드시다. For example, 물을 더 드실래요? Would you like to drink some more water? 자다, meaning to sleep, would become 주무시다. 아버지는 거실에서 주무셨어요. Father slept in the living room. 죽다, to die, becomes 돌아가시다. 증조 할아버지가 작년에 돌아가셨어요. My great-grandfather passed away last year. 있다, to exist, becomes 계시다. 선생님은 지금 어디 계세요? Where is the teacher now? And 없다, to not exist, becomes 안 계시다. 사장님은 사무실에 안 계세요. The boss is not in the office. It would actually be incorrect to use 먹으시다, 마시시다, 자시다, 죽으시다, 있으시다, or 없으시다 when talking about someone else. Now, we previously learned when we talked about the 요 form that the 요 form can also be combined with honorific speech to make it sound more polite. Using a previous example, we have 혹시 알아요? By chance, do you know? Now, this sentence, which uses the standard 요 form, so here, 해요, would probably not be considered disrespectful. However, it is also not especially polite. For example, when asking a question to a complete stranger, it would sound more respectful and better to add honorific speech. This would become 혹시 아세요? By chance, do you know? Note that the honorific verb for 알다, meaning to know, is 아시다. Again, keep in mind how honorific speech is used. Honorific verbs will only be used when you're talking about someone else, not necessarily just when you're talking to someone else. For example, 혹시 아세요 is talking about the stranger asking whether they know something or not. However, asking a stranger about someone else, perhaps your close friend, might not require this sort of speech. For example, to the same stranger you could also ask, 혹시 파란 모자를 쓴 남자애가 이쪽으로 안 지나갔나요? By chance, didn't a boy wearing a blue hat pass by this way? We also have to talk about something else related to the verbs 있다 and 없다. Although I said that these should never be used when you're talking about a person, sometimes you will use the verbs 있으시다 and 없으시다 when talking about things. So these will not be used when talking about a person. Again, use 계시다 and 안 계시다 for that. So although honorific speech is technically only supposed to be used when talking about another person, it's also acceptable to many people when talking about something that's directly a part of another person, such as any part of their body who you would want to show extra respect toward. For example, another person's eyes. In addition, honorific speech can also be used when talking about something that's owned by another person who you want to show extra respect toward. This also may be considered incorrect by many people, but is still used. For example, another person's drink or handbag. And here are a few examples of honorific verbs being used about things. 할머니 눈이 크셔. Grandmother's eyes are big. 새로 사신 가방은 정말 예쁘세요. The new bag you bought is really pretty. 혹시 시간이 있으세요? By chance, do you have any time? Literally, by chance, is there time? Verbs such as 있으시다 and 없으시다 and other honorific speech may be commonly used by service workers in this way, who may want to sound as polite as possible, even by bending the rules. For example, a worker at a coffee shop might say something like this. 주문하신 커피가 나오셨습니다. The coffee you have ordered has come out. Although using honorific speech about things in this way is generally not considered correct grammar to many people, be aware that it does happen commonly. So, can you use honorific speech when talking about your friends? Yes and no. We previously learned that you can use formal speech with your friends in moderation when you want to sound humorously fancy. Well, the same concept also applies to honorific speech. This also applies to humble speech, which we'll learn about in a later lesson. Now, when used unnecessarily, for example, when you're talking about friends, honorific speech can sound either awkward, overly fancy, or even humorous. And this will depend on the situation. In addition, using honorific speech in this way, such as when you're talking about a friend, can even sound sarcastic. For example, if you witness a close friend making a humorous mistake, you can sarcastically tease them by saying, 와, 정말 잘하셨네요. Wow, you did that really well. Note, be careful when using sarcasm in Korean. Only use it toward people you're close with, and only when it's obvious to everyone that you're joking. Alright, let's do another listening practice. This one will also use the concepts that we've covered in this lesson, and it will be between a mother talking with her daughter. First, the mother says, 영희야, 아빠 점심 언제 드실 건지 물어봐 줄래? Youngie, do you want to ask Dad when he'll eat lunch? 아빠 지금 방에 안 계세요. Dad isn't in his room now. 그래? Really? 그럼 할머니는 방에 계시니? Then is grandmother in her room? 네, yes. 근데 할머니는 주무시고 계세요. But grandmother is asleep.
영희야, 아빠 점심 언제 드실 건지 물어봐 줄래?
아빠 지금 방에 안 계세요.
그래? 그럼 할머니는 방에 계시니?
네, 근데 할머니는 주무시고 계세요.
Let's talk a little bit about progressive tense. In honorific speech, the progressive tense 고 있다 becomes 고 계시다. For example, 하다 would become 하고 계시다, not 하시고 있다. Now, it's not necessary and can even sound a bit too honorific to add an honorific verb before this form if that verb is not already honorific. For example, a unique honorific verb. Here are two examples of what I mean. While you could use 하고 계시다, you wouldn't need to use 하시고 계시다. Or, while you could use 드시고 계시다, because 드시다 is the honorific verb of 먹다, you wouldn't use 먹고 계시다. In summary, if a verb already has its own honorific verb, use that. Otherwise, it's not necessary to add an extra one. Before we go, let's do a quick quiz. You can pause the video here and then resume it again when you're ready. Here are the answers. The true or false question is false. If a verb has its own unique honorific verb, you can either use that verb or the 으시다 suffix. This is false because you should use that unique honorific verb if it has one. And here are the conjugations for these honorific verbs. 있다 becomes 계시다, 없다 becomes 안 계시다, 죽다 becomes 돌아가시다, 자다 becomes 주무시다, 먹다 becomes 드시다, and 이다 becomes 이시다. So in this lesson, we learned more about honorific verbs, and in the next lesson, we're going to talk about how you can refer to other people while still being polite. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next lesson. 그럼 다음에 또 봐!